Howdy folks, welcome to Module 9 of the CompTIA A course. Now for those of you that don't know this yet, this is the last module within Core 1 of A+. And then from Module 10, being the next module, we will be diving into the first module of Core 2, just in case you guys didn't know that yet. Now as for the main sections within this last module of Core 1, that would be deploy printer and multifunction devices, replace print device consumables, and then the third and the last section in this module will be troubleshoot print device issues. Now, if you're brand new to this channel, you might not know this yet. In the video description down below, there are timestamps with a more accurate list of what's actually covered within these sections. Doesn't 100% tell you what's in those sections, but it is a bit of a better outlook than what we see in front of us right now. Those timestamps are also quite nice if you're looking for something specific, or if you just want to go and recap on something specific if you're busy studying for the exam. And before we jump into that first section there, folks, if you haven't done it already, don't be a weenie. Give this video a like. I am doing this stuff for you guys for free, so the least you can do is give the video a like. And then if you want to know when the next modules comes out, remember to subscribe, or well, don't. Alright, let's move into the first section there, which is deploy printer and multifunction devices. The very first thing we're going to talk about here is printer setup. Yep, we have to start somewhere, right, folks? So first of all, evaluating print technology. So when you are about to buy yourself a printer, or your client, your user, or your customer printer, whatever the case might be, there's certain things you need to go and look at. Those things would be things like speed, resolution, paper handling, and finishing options. You'll find quite often when you're about to buy this printer online, or if you're standing in a store, on the box of this printer it'll say ppm. That is pages per minute. The higher the number, the better. But usually also the higher the number, the more you're going to pay for that printer. I mean, that goes without saying, right? So for a normal printer that you would have on your desk, something like an Inkjet or a very, very cheap laser printer, that will probably be about 8 ppm, maybe up to about 12. Anything above 12 is actually amazing. So if you have like 16 or 18 ppm for a printer that's on your desk, that is really good, guys. Now if you start looking at those huge office printers, those ones that you tend to go and share with some colleagues at the office, those ones go up quite high. Some of them go 70 or even up to 100 ppms. They print insanely fast. Resolution wise, obviously the higher the resolution the printer can go, the more you're going to pay. Paper handling comes down to other things. Does it have a tray? If so, does it have multiple paper trays? Can you put paper in the top? Can it go and scan? All kinds of things like that. Finishing options is more for the more expensive printers. That's not something that really applies to the cheap ones you'd have on your desk. I suppose there are exceptions to that rule. But normally those huge office printers, the ones you would share with your colleagues, a lot of companies tend to rent those. They don't actually own those. Some of those printers actually have some pretty nifty finishing options. They can go and maybe combine your documents, bind them, or do something in that regard. Next up, we need to talk about the location, the setup location of this printer. Now, if it's a very small printer that just, is for one person, then I suppose it doesn't really matter. As long as you just put it in your desk, plug it in, there you go. You're on your way. So this topic is more, I think, for those huge printers, the ones I've been bragging about, those ones you tend to share with your colleagues. With those printers, you can't just go and willy-nilly put them wherever you want. You need to be considerate. You need to be mindful. Sometimes the printer might be in the way. Sometimes its cabling might be in the way. Sometimes it might be generating a lot of noise. Sometimes it might be generating a lot of heat. Yep, they actually generate a lot of heat. And in some cases, they actually even, make a bit of a mess there in their general areas. So the things we need to look at is cable and power considerations. Are the cables going to be in the way? Are the cables going to be able to reach whatever it is they need to go and reach? Is there power at the location that you would like to go and put the printer? Environment and noise considerations. So if you're going to be putting that printer too close to the users, it's actually going to make a lot of noise. Some of these printers are quite noisy, guys. And they generate heat, they make a mess. So normally these printers would be a bit of a way, they would be a couple of meters away, a couple of feet away from the users and all that. Maybe they even have like a dedicated room for the printer in some cases, because it's going to be distracting, it's going to make a lot of noise, it's just not nice. Then we also need to look at access and security considerations. You'll find some companies don't want just any willy-nilly and his uncle to be able to reach this printer and be able to print and copy and whatever on this printer. So they'll take that a bit further, something we are going to dive into a little bit later in this module, where you can go and add security to the printer, where people can only print if they've got some sort of special card that they can go and tap or swipe on the printer. Or the more common option is to go insert some sort of pin. You cannot print something unless you insert your employee PIN number. You cannot scan something unless you go and insert your employee PIN number once again. So this is a great way of kind of blocking people from just using the printer whenever they please. Only employees can use this, and it also allows you to keep track of who used the printer or the scanner and how much. So if someone's wasting a lot of paper, in the logs you can check exactly which user account was the culprit. Then we need to look at unboxing, proper lifting techniques. Now this sounds pretty straightforward. I mean, imagine you're going to go and buy a big printer for your client, you deliver it at their offices, and now you're unboxing this printer. It sounds pretty straightforward, but let me tell you, it's not always that straightforward, guys. There's been quite a few times I had to go to a client and I actually was delivering those big printers. They don't always come as one unit. Sometimes you need to put it still together. And it's not the most heavy thing. I mean, you can actually lift it alone in some cases, but it's difficult because of its awkward size. Because of how huge this freaking thing is, it's nearly impossible to get out of the box. And if you do manage to get out of the box, it's nearly impossible to put it on its trolley or its little tray with the paper trays and all of that. So it's not heavy, but there's not really any place you can go and grab onto it. You have to kind of get your arms around it. And if you do that and you try and pick it up, you're going to probably break it because a lot of it's made out of plastic and it's very, very fragile. So you have to get your arms underneath it. But if you get your arms underneath the big printer, it's going to want to fall forward because of its awkward size. So it's very difficult. So at the end of the day, you need some help, guys. If at all possible, get at least one other person there to help you lift this printer on the other side. Now, I know I'm supposed to do that, and yet I did not. Not because I didn't follow any rules, it's just sometimes I was really alone. There was no customers to even help me pick it up. I couldn't even ask the customer to help me. There was just nobody there. So sometimes it is what it is. Fortunately for me, I never dropped the freaking thing. So if you are one of my old bosses, I'm sorry. There was nobody there. I don't think my old bosses will be listening to these videos, but you never know. So if you are, I'm sorry. There was nobody there. What can I say? Anyway, moving on. Print device connectivity. So how do we actually connect this printer to users and various sorts of devices? There's many ways. We're going to be talking about 3 ways today. The first one is USB. So USB is more applicable to the lower ranking printers, the cheaper ones, if you will. I don't mean that in a bad way. So if you go to some sort of tech store that sells printers, you will find that these cheaper end printers, inkjet and laser, that you would go and take home or to your small office, home office environment, those can normally go and connect in 3 possible ways. USB used to be the most common way, but now lately, the last 2 or 3 years, I've noticed that you actually have a hard time finding a printer that still has USB capability. That actually used to be a very popular option, and now I still see them, you still get them, but it seems to be very difficult to find a printer that still has USB capability. Most of the printers I encounter these days have only wireless capability, if you know the kinds you want to take home. So I specifically went out of my way to find a printer the other day that has USB capability because I don't trust the wireless capability of these small printers. More on that in a bit. So if you're going to be going to a store, I would say check the packaging. Make absolutely sure the printer has the connectivity options that you are looking for. Whether you are physically in the store, whether you're buying this online for yourself with a customer, make sure it has the connectivity that you are looking for. USB, as I've said, is normally for a printer that's close by. It's normally only has the function to connect to one machine with that USB cable. And if you do decide to go for the USB printers, something I want to mention to you guys here, it doesn't matter what brand or what model you buy, the majority of these printers do not come with the USB cable included. I'm sure there are exceptions to the rule, but the ones I've encountered, they don't normally come with the USB cable included. So guys, if you are going to be buying this for your customer or selling to a customer, I would highly recommend you advise the customer, dear sir or madam, your printer will most likely not come with a USB cable included. Would you like me to add that for you as an extra? And that's just called being professional, because if you're going to sell the customer a printer like that and they're gonna go and unbox this and they're gonna find no USB cable, they're gonna blame you, even though it's technically not you. But at the very least, it should have been your responsibility to know that and to at the very least inform the customer that, hey, the cable is sold separately. It's just called being professional. Then you also get Ethernet. Now, Ethernet is a network cable. Now, the first thing that pops into most people's minds here is a LAN cable. And yes, in this case, we are talking about a LAN cable. But for those of you that don't know this yet, Ethernet is not specifically just LAN cables. Ethernet is many kinds of network cables. These could be telephone cables, in other words, Cat3. They could be Cat5, Cat6, Cat7, Cat8. They could be coaxial cable, they could be fiber cable. All of those cables fall into the category called Ethernet. So Ethernet is not necessarily limited to just LAN cables like a lot of people seem to be thinking. Anyway, when it comes to printers, this actually is a LAN cable. So you could go and connect your printer via LAN cable. This is normally what we tend to go and do for the bigger office printers that we share amongst our colleagues. So we'll go and put the printer on one side, we make sure it's got power, we'll plug a LAN cable into it, and we will install that printer on every machine that needs to be able to print to that printer, obviously. And then they just go and collect their print jobs at that printer. All of it is sent through the network. The last way you can go and connect this printer, this is more common for, once again, the cheaper models, wireless. You need to be very careful buying yourself or a customer a wireless printer these days, guys. Because you might be buying this for a customer now, and you might be under the impression, and they might be under the impression that it can connect to the existing office Wi-Fi. And now when you get there, and you give it to the customer, it turns out that this printer can only generate its own little hotspot, and the customer is going to have to go and connect to that every time. Can you imagine how upset that customer is going to be with you? Because it's something you are expected to know. Now, it's impossible for us to know this stuff sometimes, unless you've bought that exact model before. But other than that, it's kind of difficult for us to know this stuff when we don't know everything. So yeah, be careful of that, guys. Which is why I went into the store the other day looking for a printer that's got USB function. So I had a printer. This printer of mine has USB function and wireless. And I don't mind the wireless. It'll be awesome if I can connect to it wirelessly on my home network. But I was concerned that if I were to buy one, it might have its own hotspot. There's a very good chance of that. So I thought, okay, you know what? Let me get one that also has a USB function just in case that happens to be the case. And I bought one. I struggled to find one that's got a USB function. And eventually I found one. And guess what? Its wireless function was exactly what I thought it was. It makes its own little hotspot. Most of these printers, when they make their own hotspot, they've got a password on that. And for the life of me, I could not find this password anywhere. I couldn't find it on the top. I couldn't find it in the manuals. I couldn't find it anywhere. And then I read somewhere online that, hey, this is sometimes the serial number of the printer. And I thought, no, really? Because that's a very long thing. And I typed it in, and behold, that is the password. So if you guys can't find the password to your printer's own little hotspot, try the serial number. There's a very good chance your serial number might actually be the password, guys. All right, let's talk about print preferences. So how you access this is probably going to vary, from laptop to desktop. It's going to depend on what operating system you're using. And if you're using something like Windows 10 or 11, like most of you guys will probably do, it's going to depend on whether you're using the old control panel or the new control panel called the settings app, for those of you that's familiar with the settings app. So potato, there is a picture for you guys of what it more or less looks like. And when you happen to go into the printer preferences, it does not look exactly the same for all of you guys. It's going to vary from printer to printer, from make to make, from model to model. But in essence, the things you guys will be able to go and configure there will be things like paper quality. You can go and choose the size of the paper that you are using or the printer is currently using. Most commonly, it's going to obviously be A4. That's what most of us use. You can go and choose the source. So this is a big printer, not just a small printer. If it's a big printer that's got more than one paper tray, you can choose the source. Which tray do you want it to use? There's probably a good reason why you want to go and use a specific tray. Maybe the other one is empty, maybe it's broken. I'm sure you have your own reasons. You can go and choose what type of paper it's using. So if it's normal paper or is it some other kind of paper, because sometimes the printer needs to know, otherwise it's not going to handle it the right way. And you can go and choose whether you want to go and use draft or economy mode, which means it's going to just basically do it in a very, very, very light ink mode. It's going to save you a heck of a lot of ink if you're just testing something. Then you have options like finishing. How do you want it to finish? This is more applicable to those huge office printers, the expensive ones that not all of us can afford. So some of these big printers have finishing options like duplexing and book fold, and you can sometimes even go and choose the orientation. I've seen that one actually is an option you will find on some of the lower ranking printers in the preferences. Alright, let's move on to printer sharing. Alright, so there's various kinds of printer sharing we can do, folks. The first one is print server. Printer is attached to network and clients connect to it directly. So what's going to happen here is this is usually one of those big office printers in most cases. It's plugged into a normal LAN cable and it's installed on an actual server, or people are just going to go and install the printer directly on their respective PCs. Just installing the driver and there they go. So whenever someone wants to go and print something, they just go and open the respective document. They select this office printer that they've got in common in the menu and they can go and print it. One person is not influenced by another person on the network or another device. The only exception to this is the actual queue on the printer. Because the two people are printing on the same printer at the same time, obviously the first come, first serve scenario will apply here. Then we have a printer share. This means the printer is installed or attached to a PC host and it's managed by a PC host. So to give you guys an example here is, imagine you have a small office, home office environment. So it's an office that's got about approximately 20 people in it, approximately 20 desktops or laptops. And in this small office environment, only 2 users have small little printers. So 2 random people have got small office printers and they are on these people's desks. So those 2 people can obviously print because they have their own printers. But what about the other 18 people? Can they print? Now, by default, no. But what they can go and do is they can go and take their respective documents and they can email those documents to those 2 people that's got printers and ask them very nicely to print it for them. Or they can go and take those documents and put them onto an external drive, a memory stick, or they can just send them through the network. There's various ways of getting it to one of those 2 people that actually has a printer. And then you just basically need to go and beg them or ask them very nicely if they can print a document for you. Now, something else you can go and do here in those scenarios is on those 2 computers where those 2 printers are connected directly. This could be probably be via something like a USB cable. You can actually go onto those 2 computers and you can go and share those 2 printers. Yep. And when you share those printers, all you need to do, or all the other users have to go and do, is to just type in those 2 computers' names or their IP addresses on the network. So if I go to my machine and I'm one of the other 18 people, I'm going to go and type in the IP address or the name of those 2 PCs that's got those printers directly on them. As soon as you do that, it's going to open everything that those machines have got shared, including their printers. And all you need to do is just double click on their printer or right click on it and say connect, and voila, you will be able to print to their printer. The catch here is those machines are acting like a middleman and you need them to be on. So if that person turns their PC off, you can't print. So it only works if they have the machine turned on at that point in time. So if that person is not at the office but they happen to have left their PC there, you just need to turn their PC on. You don't even need to log on. You don't even need to log on by the password screen. You can literally just leave it idling there. As long as the print spooler and all that stuff is running in the background, you will be able to still print through that person's PC. So everything will be managed by that PC, which is why, the queue is managed, everything is managed by that PC, which is why it needs to be on. So on that note, let me show you guys how this will all work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the control panel of my computer. It just so happens that I've got a small printer installed in this computer that I'm using today. And I'm going to show you guys a couple of these things that I've just explained. So let me switch over to control panel.
A few moments later.
Alright folks, here we are on my control panel. So the one that I'm talking about today is this little Canon printer that I've got going for me here. What make it is, what model it is, honestly it does not matter. But like I said earlier, if you were to go and right click on these printers, and if you were to go to the preferences or the properties, that is going to vary from make to make and from model to model. So what you see in my menus, yes, you will for the most part have the same options, but it will not look the same as mine and it will not be in the same places as mine. but the theory and the concept still applies. So if we go to my printer properties, that's where I will have the ability to go and share my printer. So I'm going to go click on printer properties. If I drag this here, you can see mine's very clearly labeled. Yours will also be. I can't guarantee that it will be a tab. It might be a tab. It might not be a tab. It might just be listed as a button, but it normally is very clearly labeled, the sharing function. So I'm going to go click there on sharing, and this is something I'm going to go and do in just a bit. If I were to have gone and right clicked here and I said printer preferences, which is one of the pictures we saw earlier, mine looks a bit different than what you guys saw earlier. So regarding this printer of mine, which is a very cheap, small entry level printer, I can go and choose the paper size, the media type. You can see what they mean by media type. That can be plain paper. Is it photo papers? It's those glossy kinds of papers. If I plan on printing glossy, photo, kind of papers, photos, then that's the kind of paper you want to use. That's usually a lot more expensive than your normal conventional paper. Quality, so how much ink is it going to go and use? Paper source, so where is it going to be getting the paper from? Mine is a cheap printer. It literally looks like what you see there in the picture. So it only has one place you can get the paper from, and that's the back. So this little flap here at the back will just open. I'm just going to put paper there into the back. So I only have one paper source, but the bigger the printer, the more likely it's going to have other trays for that matter. So I'm going to close this one up, close that back up. Let me just go back to properties. There's my sharing tab. So at the moment, this printer is not shared. So what's going to normally happen here is this printer here will have the printer's name in there. And what you need to go and do is give it a proper user-friendly name. So I'm going to have to click here on share. But before I share this, let me show you what it currently looks like when you run a search for my machine over the network. So I'm going to quickly switch over. Alright, here we go, folks. So that is currently my private IP address on my home network today. It's 103. 192.168.0.103. I could have either typed in my machine's name, or I can type in the private IP address, potato, potato, and that is everything that's currently shared on my machine. So if anyone were to go and type in my machine's name or IP address, this is what they will see. At the moment, it's just files or folders and stuff that's shared. No printer. At least not yet anyway. So let's go back to that printer menu. Let's quickly go and share that printer. Alright, here we've got that menu open. Now I'm going to go click here, share this printer. Give it a name. So if this is a big company environment and there's a lot of printers and it's a big building, you might want to go give this a very proper, accurate name. So if this is, for example, the printer reception, you might want to go and say something like reception printer. Then at least these folks know which printer they're about to go and connect to and where they need to go and collect their documents. So in my case, I'm just going to go and type in, hang on, printer. There we go. That's my name, by the way. Don't wear it out. Okay, so I'm going to go and say apply. Okay. And now it doesn't show yet, so I'm going to have to refresh. If I right click here and I say refresh, check it out, folks. That is what people will see now. So all they need to do now is they just go and right click here and they click on connect, or they can just double click. And if in a matter of about 1 or 2 seconds, it's going to connect that printer to their machines. And the next time they want to go and print a document, they can actually open that document on their own machines. And they're going to have this printer listed. It's going to be listed as whatever name you've typed in here. They click on it and it will print the document, assuming the PC in the middle is turned on, which is now in this case me. So let's switch back over to that presentation of ours. Alright, here we are. And the next topic up is printer security. Now, we did briefly hit and run on this topic earlier. I told you guys when you go and put a printer somewhere, you might want to go put a pin on it. So if people want to go and release a document or scan a document, you can go and have them put in a pin to release the documents or to go and do scanning, which also allows you to keep logs of who was using the printer. So if it gets used or abused or whatever the case might be, you can go and check the logs. Anyway, so regarding printer security, user authentication. So when it comes to user authentication, print server versus shared printer. How do we verify people are who they claim to be? And how do we keep tabs on them and to see who actually used the printer, who did not, who's abusing the printer, who's wasting paper, who's wasting ink, all that kinds of stuff. So when it comes to a print server, that's the one that most companies tend to go and use. You've got a heck of a lot more control. You can go and put pins on it. You can go and force people to use some sort of fancy card if your printer is that fancy. You can go and keep logs. You can go and see exactly who printed, when they printed, how much they printed, how much paper, and how much ink they were using. So you've got a lot of control when it comes to the print server method. The drawback to that one is it's slightly more complicated. I'm not going to say it's rocket science. It's not that difficult. It's just slightly more complicated than the shared printer option. So the shared printer option is the one I just demonstrated for you guys. That is very, very easy to go and set up, literally like you guys just saw. So the benefit there is it's easy peasy. The drawback is you don't have as much control over it. I can't exactly go and see who's printing from my printer, and I cannot 100% go and choose who can go and print and who cannot. So I can go and put sharing permissions on my machine. So you cannot open my machine unless I've given you an account with a password. So if you want to go and access my machine over the network, you need to type in a username and a password before you can access my machine. That's the only real user authentication you can go and enforce. So security is quite lacking when it comes to the shared printer method. Then we've got secured print and badging, which is something I've been mentioning this whole time. Hold the print jobs until user releases at the print device. More and more companies are using this method these days, guys. So there's just too many people wasting paper, wasting ink, and just printing random nonsense which has got nothing to do with the work. They will go and print the guide to the World of Warcraft or something random like that, which has got nothing to do with work. And it costs the company money. So if every weasel and his uncle goes and prints nonsense like that, before you know it, you're wasting a ton of money on paper and ink. So what they do now is they will go put pins, at the very, very least, a pin. It's sometimes a badge, but I've seen the pin as the more popular option. They'll go put some sort of pin system on the printer, and if you print something, it's not going to be printed immediately until you get to that printer and you insert your pin number. Otherwise, people are also going to take your pages. That's another issue at printers. You'll print something, you'll get there, and your papers are missing because someone took it, and they didn't have the decency to go and bring it back when they saw they took it by mistake. So at least now, nobody's going to be able to take your pages by mistake or on purpose. When you get to the printer, you type in your PIN. It's normally a 4-digit number. Could be longer or shorter. And when you do that, only then will it print your document, which means people cannot exactly just go and take your documents unless you still left it there at that point in time. And now this PIN system also allows companies to keep track now of who printed. You can release by entering the PIN or swiping a contactless smart badge on the reader on that printer. I haven't really seen those. They're very, very rare. It's a very expensive option. But I think going forward, we'll probably start seeing more and more of those, because that is the future after all. Audit log, I've been mentioning it all this time. So that's the history of print jobs. So if someone was wasting paper or ink, I can go into the logs and I can go and check exactly who was the person that was printing so much, because I can see via your logs. So if you were typing in your PIN, that PIN is associated to your name, and I can go and check which name was the culprit here. Centralized logging. So this is all kept on a server somewhere. Alright folks, that brings us to the end of the first section in this module. Let's move on to the next, which is replace print device consumables. So the consumables that's being mentioned in the title is things that's being used, kind of like in your car. You'll be surprised to know how many similarities there is between printers and cars for some strange reason. So if we go look at a vehicle, a car, that would be things like your tires or wheels, depending on which country you're in, you might call it something different. The fuel, the oil, all that kinds of stuff that you will go and replace from time to time, of course. Printers, that is the same deal. That'll be things like paper, the various sorts kinds of ink they use, the rollers, all that kinds of jazz. So let's go and look at laser printer maintenance first. We're going to go and tackle quite a few different kinds of printers. The first one up is laser printers. So let's first talk about loading papers into these laser printers. Laser printers are easily the most common kind of printer you guys will find these days, especially in an office environment. At home, it'll probably be a 50-50 kind of deal between laser and inkjet, depending on what your budget can afford. But I would recommend going laser if you can afford it. Yes, laser costs roughly about twice as much as an inkjet for home use, at least the initial cost of it. But in the long term, it's going to save you a heck of a lot of money, guys. Laser printers use something called toner, for the ink, where inkjet printers use liquid ink, liquid ink cartridges. and those work out very expensive. So you want to try and get yourself a laser printer if you can afford it. The one I was using for my demo earlier was an inkjet printer, and at the time when I needed a printer, that was during COVID, I didn't have money for toner ones, for lasers, and that's why I got that. So when it comes to loading paper into your laser printer, the first thing you need to go and look at is the media type selection. What kind of media type are you going to be shoving in there? Is this A4, A5, A3? Not all printers take all size papers. You need to make sure you got the right type of media. You need to go and check the media guides. So some of these huge, big office laser printers, when you go and open the paper tray, you'll find they've got these nice little guides inside where you can go and choose what type of paper you're putting in there. So if you're about to go and put in A4, you first put in the A4 paper, and you'll find these guides that basically keep it in place, which basically tells the printer what kind of paper you're putting in there. Pretty neato, right? When you've got proper storage, where do you put the paper? I'm not talking about putting the packs of paper on a shelf or a drawer somewhere. I'm talking about actually inside the printer. Some of these huge office printers have got trays, paper trays, I think is what they call them. Some of them are just used for storage. Some of them are used as backup trays. So as soon as it finishes the paper in the one tray, it'll actually switch over automatically to the second or the third or the fourth tray, depending on how many trays, of course, it's got. Some printers have got a lot. Let's look at replacing the toner cartridge. So when it comes to changing the cartridge, guys, this looks different from printer to printer. It's going to depend on the make. It's going to depend on the model. Most toner cartridges will look something similar to what you guys see there in the picture. Not exactly like that. It could sometimes just be like a plastic bottle kind of thing, but either way, it is still referred to as a cartridge in some cases. Even though it's actually a bottle, I've seen people just call it a cartridge. Now, the one that you guys see there in the picture, that is an actual cartridge. Where you put that in, how you put that in, I can't tell you. It depends on the printer. Every printer is unique, but it normally involves opening some sort of special panel or some sort of special tray, or maybe a panel and a tray, and then it's gonna go and expose the various kinds of cartridges. Some printers will only have one, which is normally black. Some of them will have one, two, or three, or even four cartridges. So if it's two, the one will be black, the other one will be a mix of three different colors. If it's four, kind of like the one you see in the picture, there will be a black one, and then three colors, the bluish one, which we call cane, the pink one, which is normally referred to as magenta, not even sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, and then the yellow, which is, well, yellow. When putting in a new cartridge into a printer, there's something you guys need to be very careful for, and this even applies to those bottle kind of cartridges. There is packing strips. So it's not a matter of, hey, let me just shove in a new cartridge. No, guys. These cartridges are sealed. There's a bit of a strip on it, kind of like a sticker, and it basically closes the hole where the ink is going to be coming out. It's powder ink. The toner is powder ink. And this is just to prevent it from making a mess and all that kinds of stuff. There's various reasons behind that. Here's a bit of a picture for you guys of what that would look like. So if you look at the picture at the bottom right, there's a little arrow there. That arrow and the little orange strip next to it, that is the strip they're talking about. So you need to remove that strip usually on the cartridge. Various cartridges have various kinds of strips. You need to remove that first, and only then can you actually put the cartridge into its slot. And funny enough, the same thing actually applies to other kinds of cartridges. Like if you go look at an inkjet cartridge, it also quite often has some sort of strip that you have to go and remove first before you can actually just go and put it into the printer. So something I want you guys to keep in mind, or just be mindful of if you go and decide to go and replace these cartridges, is you cannot exactly just go and throw them in the trash. I'm sure some people do that. Maybe some of you guys do that, but it's actually not really good for the environment if you're up for that kind of thing. And it's actually not allowed in a lot of countries. It's actually against the law. I know in my country it's against the law to throw those things into the trash. So you should go and dispose of them the proper way. You'll be surprised to know that in a lot of countries, these things are actually worth a lot of money, depending on what kind of cartridge it is. You can go and recycle them, and you do get a fair amount of money back for those things. So if you want some pocket money for beer after work, or something in that regard, some cartridges, if you go and recycle them, assuming you can find a place that actually takes them back, that is a good way to go and make yourself a decent amount of cash, guys, in case you didn't know that. And when it comes to cleaning the printer, there's various ways you can do that. It's going to depend once again on what the size of the printer is, what kind of printer it is. Are we talking laser here or something else? But generally it involves opening one or more panels, cleaning some of the components inside, And one of the ways we do that is to use a cloth, a very soft fiber cloth. And you might need to use some sort of liquid. It's not normally water. I suppose you could use water, but we don't recommend it. It's normally an alcohol that we use. Not the kind that you can consume. No, it's very poisonous to humans. We use isopropyl alcohol. It's the kind of alcohol you use to go and clean printers, clean the heads, clean this, clean that. And it's also the same kind of alcohol you'll use to clean your glasses if you're wearing glasses. Yep. And then let's talk about the feed and transfer rollers. There's a bit of a picture of that, guys. Please take that with a pinch of salt. It's going to look very different for every printer. So it's just like opening the bonnet to a car's engine. In essence, they do the same thing. They get you from A to B. It's an internal combustion engine that uses fuel, that kinds of stuff. But where you find the components, like the alternator, the water pump, the fan belt, all of these assorted components, it's different. It looks different every car. It's located in a different place every car, but they do the same thing in the end of the day. Printers are the same thing. When you open a printer, they look different in each and every one of them, but they do the same thing in the end of the day. So that picture there, take it with a pinch of salt. What we see there is a picture of the rollers. They're made of rubber. That is what actually picks up the paper out of the tray, because it's rubber, so it's going to press down on the paper, which means it grips it very nice. It's going to move the paper around, and inside this paper is going to go through many rollers in the printer to get to where it needs to be. And as time goes by, these rubber rollers get smoother and smoother and smoother, just like the tires in your car. So you'll see there's a lot of similarities between a printer and a car. Like I said earlier, I noticed that purely by chance one day. So just like the tires in your car, it gets smoother and smoother over time, and then obviously you've got less and less grip over time, and you can start slipping on the road, especially if it's wet. Same thing applies to printers, guys. As time goes by, those rubber rollers, they get smoother and smoother. They've got less and less grip, which means it's going to start slipping. And when that starts happening, the paper is going to go in skew. It's not going to go in the way it's supposed to. And that's the most common reason the average printer will normally have a paper jam. It's because one or more rollers are starting to slip. They don't have grip, and it's a clear sign that you need to go and replace these rollers. Just like the tires in a car, the rollers in a printer can actually be replaced, guys. Pretty neato, right? And just like a car that needs to be serviced every X amount of kilos or X amount of miles, same applies to a printer. Every certain amount of clicks or ticks, or pages, you need to go and service that printer. So this involves normally changing things like the rollers, just like you would go and change the tires on a car. So every time your printer prints a page, that can be referred to as a page that's been printed, or a click, or a tick. Your printer has a lifetime counter of how many ticks or clicks or pages it has printed in its lifetime. There's also other names for that. Just like a car that's got a lifetime mileage on it, or kilometers on the clock. So depending on which country you're on, you might call it kilos, you might call it miles. There's a lifetime counter on it, and that shows you how many it has. And when it reaches a certain amount of mileage, you need to go and service the car. It needs to go in for a service. Same thing happens with printers. Now, there are times in life when your car needs to go in for repairs, or certain things needs to be replaced before the service interval. It happens. It's got nothing to do with the age of the car. It's completely random in some cases. Printers are the same, guys. So maybe at a certain amount of ticks, it was supposed to have its rollers changed, and then something happened, and now you need to go and change one or more of them ahead of time. It is gonna happen. So that's where you come into play as a technician, and you're gonna go to the site, you're gonna inspect it, and when it keeps getting paper jams over and over the same place, after inspection, you might realize that, oh, it's the rollers. They're too smooth, and you're gonna go and change one or more, or just all of them. It's usually best you go and change them all, because if one of them starts slipping, the other ones are not far behind. Alright folks, so that's a bit about laser printers. As I've said before, it uses powder ink, and what it does is it uses, it charges some things negatively and positively. The ink, the papers, the one gets charged positively, the other one gets charged negatively. At the end of the day, the paper gets attracted to the ink gets attracted to the paper, the powder ink, and it basically fuses to the paper using heat. Not the actual topic here, because the topic here is more about maintenance. Just thought I'd mention it there for you guys. Now moving on to our other kind of printer here, that would be Inkjet, probably the second most common kind of printer you get. We're more specifically going to be talking about the maintenance aspects about it, not the actual printer itself. But for those of you not familiar with Inkjet printers, it's probably the second most common printer you would get. In a household, this actually might be the most common kind of printer you get, because it's the more affordable one when it comes to buying. but it's not the most affordable one when it comes to maintaining. When it comes to maintaining, laser is usually the cheaper one out of the two. So inkjet printers also uses cartridges, normally a black cartridge, and then they've got another cartridge which is a mix of those three colors we mentioned earlier, which is cane, magenta, and yellow. Sometimes these three colors will be separate cartridges, but from my experience, in most cases, they will be in one cartridge. It's just a much bigger cartridge compared to the black cartridge. So when it comes to replacing these inkjet cartridges, you can, if you want, very, very, very expensive, or you can actually go and reuse the same cartridges. I suppose you can call it recycling. So you're going to go and take that cartridge. It's got like a little sticker on one of the holes. You can go and take a syringe with some ink and you can actually go and refill this cartridge. It's not always advisable because it makes a heck of a mess. You need to know what you're doing. But inside these cartridges is effectively a sponge. When you take a syringe, you can actually go and refill the cartridge. Be careful not to overfill it. And then once you've done that, you just reseal it again with a nice little sticker. And you can actually go and reuse the same cartridge. They don't tell you how many times this can be done, but from my experience, I've seen it normally works about 3 or 4 times. And after that, the cartridge needs to be replaced. After that, it just starts making a mess and it just really doesn't work. But still, refilling it is a heck of a lot cheaper than buying a new one. It's really, really a heck of a lot cheaper. When you get something called print head alignment, it's not really something you yourself have to go and do. It's something that most of these printers do themselves. It takes a while and it makes a heck of a lot of noise. So when you're about to go and print something, especially if the printer's been off for a while, you'll hear the printer making a noise. You're going to hear it going ziggity zag inside, even though it's not printing. It's because it's aligning itself. When you get something called print head cleaning, that is the actual cartridges themselves. There's normally at least 2 cartridges in the average printer. And on the actual cartridge themselves, there's a picture for you guys of what that would look like, more or less. The bottom of that cartridge, that head needs to be cleaned from time to time. The ink gets hard, it gets dry on there, and sometimes you just need to get it off. And the way we do that is with isopropyl alcohol in most cases. Just be careful. If you don't do this the right way, it's going to make a heck of a lot of a mess in your printer, especially in the beginning time. It eventually does go away, but sure, you don't want that mess in your printer. If at all possible, try not to touch the head. Those heads don't like being touched. If you touch them, it's just going to smear all over in your printer. So do not touch the head. You can only touch it with something like a clean cloth, fiber cloth, or maybe some sort of cotton ball or something which you can go and use with isopropyl alcohol. It's the only real thing you can actually go and use to touch these heads. Alright, moving on to thermal printers, or more specifically the maintenance. So the thermal printers, for those of you not familiar, is the kinds that you'll find at most point of sales. So if you go to a store, grocery store, clothes store, wherever, normally when you purchase something, they will give you an invoice or a slip of some kind. And you'll find in most countries, most of the time, that invoice, that slip, or that receipt, whatever you guys call it in your respective countries, usually that is printed with a thermal printer in most countries. You'll notice this because after a couple of days or weeks or months, that slip, invoice or receipt or whatever you want to call it, is going to become faded and faded to a point where it's actually just blank. You can't see anything on it. And the reason behind that is because it uses a wax kind of ink. So it uses heat, it's a wax kind of ink, and if it's exposed to heat or light, it'll start fading and fading. So if you need to keep a receipt or something for guarantee purposes or warranty purposes or whatever your reason might be, maybe for tax purposes, you should probably keep that in a cool, dark place, like a shoebox. But even though you do that, it's still going to fade over time, just a heck of a lot slower. So my advice to you, if you need that receipt for something, scan it. So if it's for your taxes, scan in the beginning when it's nice, bright, and clear. And then later on, if you do need it and it's faded, then at least you don't have to worry about the fader because you still have the clear scanned version of that receipt. So once again, this printer uses a direct thermal process. It applies wax ink to a slip or paper of some kind. The paper selection is going to vary from printer to printer. They're not all the same. You'll find every point of sale system has a different size printer, but they normally work with some sort of roll of paper. Eventually, when the roll is done or empty, you'll find a person behind the counter is going to go get another roll, and they're going to go and put it in there. It takes a while for them to get it in there, and eventually it's going to print again. When it comes to cleaning and clearing the debris, it's not something you have to really worry about too much of these printers, but over time, inside where the roll goes, there's a bit of debris. Because normally we tear off these slips or papers, and as time goes by, that serrated teeth gets a bit dull, and you need to go and replace those from time to time, not often. And on the inside of that slot where the paper goes, there's a lot of debris just lying around there, because if you're repeatedly pulling paper every day, it gets dirty in there, it gets messy, so you need to just go and clear it out. Very quick, very easy to go and do that. Alright guys, and then the last printer I've got for you today in this module is the impact printer. It's very, very unlikely you guys will ever encounter this printer. It's basically extinct, but I still see them from time to time. Now in my country, for some reason, the only place I ever find these, and I don't know why, is at a pharmacy. Every time I go to a pharmacy, different companies, different brands, all pharmacies here, they always have one of these impact printers. I don't know why. If it's some sort of fetish, I don't know. So the benefit to these printers are they are insanely cheap when it comes to paper and the actual ink associated. A drawback is since they are nearly extinct, good luck finding spare parts if they break, because you're not going to find any. They don't really make these anymore. I don't think they make them at all, quite frankly. So if you have a printer that's going to break down on you, the technician, even if they know what they're doing, they're not going to be able to find spare parts for you unless they've got other printers, second-hand ones, which are broken down, and maybe they can go and salvage some spare parts from those printers. But you're not going to find new parts for these printers anymore. It's difficult. The paper they use, it's the width of an A4 page, but it's not the length of an A4 page. It's one long continuous page, and you're going to have to tear it off, kind of like a slip or a receipt. It's got serrated teeth. You'll have to go and tear it off, these papers. And unlike most printers, these printers do not use rubber rollers to get the page to move. It uses those holes that you guys see in the picture. You'll see on the sides of that page, there's holes. It uses sprockets. So on both sides of the paper, it's got sprockets. Looks kind of like little gears or little teeth that basically goes and fits perfectly through those little holes. And that moves the paper along. And once you've printed your paper, whatever it might be that you wanted to print on that, you can actually tear off those sides of the holes to make it look nice. So you don't have to worry about it, looking unappealing. You can actually go and tear it off. So paper selection, unfortunately, only takes one size paper. It cannot use other kinds of paper. It uses ribbon. So it's not liquid ink. It's not powder ink. It's an actual ribbon. It looks like a black purple kind of paper that gets striped by pins. So when you print a document, it's got a bunch of letters on it. This printer's got pins inside that strikes that black purplish kind of paper, and it basically copies that symbol onto the piece of paper. So if it's the letter A or the letter B or the letter C you want to print, it's going to strike that ribbon with the letter A, B, or C, and it's going to copy that symbol onto the paper. For the lack of a better description, that's basically what's going to happen. Pretty neato, right? It makes a heck of a lot of noise, this printer. It goes geek, 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 geek. Yeah, I know, it sounds weird, but that is what it does. Anyway, folks, that's the end of section 2 in this module. That leaves us with the last module, the third module, which is Troubleshoot Print Device Issues. Now, you folks can probably guess that this specific section is all about troubleshooting your printers. So, yes, this section is for people studying for the exam, blah, blah, blah. But this section can also be very useful for people that's just troubleshooting some sort of printer-related issue. So maybe you are not studying for the exam, or maybe you are, but if you're experiencing some sort of print-related issue with one of your users, clients, customers, this might actually be a nice little troubleshooting list for you to go through, guys. You can actually come through this list and just come and check maybe the problem you are experiencing there, maybe it's listed here. And if it's listed here, maybe you can find a possible solution, maybe not. At the end of the day, you've got nothing to lose and something to gain. So I would say maybe bookmark specifically this section, not the whole video, just this last section for troubleshooting purposes if you are the kind of person that works with printers. You never know, maybe it'll help you guys out of a pickle jam. Anyway, before we jump into our little list of troubleshooting steps and all that kinds of jazz, if you guys are still watching at this point in time, because it's quite deep in the video, this is the usual section where I'll give you guys some random nonsense to go type in the comment section just for gags and fun, just to keep you guys awake, otherwise you guys are going to fall asleep. So I was watching the Shrek movie last night of my boys, and I saw this random section at the beginning of the video, beginning of the movie, where they talked about the Muffin Man. So if you guys want, you can go make a random sentence in the comment section about the Muffin Man, if you ever watched the Shrek movie. It's in the beginning of Shrek 1. It's an animation movie for those of you that don't know Shrek 1. So go make a comment in the comment section about Shrek 1. That's just to confuse the people that hasn't watched up until this point of the video. Only the people that actually watched up until the end of section 2 will know what the heck you are talking about. The rest are going to be very clueless. If you want, you can also go and post your questions in the comment section. But try and keep your questions to the relevant module, like I said before in the other modules. So if you've got a question about something in A+, try, if possible, to put your question on the relevant module. It's just to make my life easier when it comes to answering everybody's questions. mean, it doesn't help you go and ask me questions about motherboards on the module which is all about printers. That's just, no, don't do that. Ask me about your motherboard questions on the motherboard module. Ask me about your printer questions on the printer module. So this module is all about printers. So if you guys have questions, you can go post them in the comment section, but try as close as possible to keep them regarding printers, unless of course it's about the courses in general or the exam in general. Alright, so finally getting to the printer issues. Printer connectivity issues. Let's start with that one first. You or the user or the client or the customer are complaining, moaning and groaning that the printer does not want to connect. You're troubleshooting, but you don't know why. So it can't detect printer to install it, or the printer is reporting that it's offline by the operating system. So what can we do about that? The very first thing I want you guys to go and check is verify power and the status via the print device control panel. That's the first thing you can go and do. Make sure the printer is actually on. I know it sounds silly, but you'll be surprised how many times the printer is actually just plugged out or turned off by the wall socket or just not plugged in behind the printer. So make sure the printer is actually on. Double check it on the control panel. Then you guys can move on to step 2, which is to check removable components, cartridges, and service panels. Some printers are fussy. If there's a panel that's open, or something that's still open, or something that's been removed, like a cartridge, some of these printers are fussy and just refuse to turn themselves on, or do not want to connect. It's kind of like a safety function. So make sure all the panels and everything is closed and plugged back in the way they're supposed to be. The third item you guys can move on to is to try and print a test page from the print device control panel, assuming of course the printer is able to turn on. So if it's able to turn on but you just can't connect to it, try and see if you can print a test page from the printer directly. A lot of these printers have a print function where you can go onto the control panel and print a test page from there instead of doing it from your computer. If they're able to do it from there, then you know it really is some sort of connectivity issue. Do a power cycle on the print device, or consider doing a factory reset. Now, the word power cycle, or words power cycle, sounds very fancy and complicated. That's typical CompTIA for you. That basically just means restart the device. So whenever someone says do a power cycle, it really just means restart that device. And it sounds funny because that surprisingly does solve a lot of problems, guys. You'll be surprised to know how many times it really does solve a problem to just go and restart something. I know we always joke in IT where we say, hey, have you tried turning it off and on again? We joke about it, but surprisingly, it actually does fix a lot of issues. So try restarting the device. If that doesn't work, you may or may not need to consider doing a reset on that printer. The fifth item here on the list I've got for you guys is to inspect the cables and connectors, which you might have partially already done in step 1. When it came to power, you might have checked the power cables. So check the power cables if you have not done it already. Check the network cables. If it's using some sort of network cable like a LAN cable, check it. Make sure it's plugged in correctly. Make sure it's not damaged somewhere along the line. You never know. It might have gotten damaged somewhere along the line, guys. Now let's move on to another issue you guys will probably encounter with printers very commonly. Printer feed issues. Most commonly it's going to be some sort of paper jam that you guys are going to encounter. So when it comes to paper jam, identify the location of the paper jam. If it's a very small printer or an old printer, you might have no idea. Maybe it'll just tell you, hey, there's a jam. Maybe it won't. I've seen sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But the more modern printers, especially the big ones, they will tell you that there's a jam, and not just that, it'll even tell you where the jam is, which I find is very useful. It'll tell you it's in tray 1 or tray 2, it's under panel 1 or panel 2, and you can actually go and open that panel and you'll find the paper is jammed there. Now, the proper way to release this would normally be to go and turn the printer off, to turn it off by the wall then as well, turn it off by the wall socket, unplug it from the wall socket, and then you wait about 5 to 15 minutes for this printer to cool down first, because a lot of these printers, especially the laser printers, get very, very hot. You can get third-degree burns, and you can even end up in the ICU, in the hospital. You don't want that, guys. Now, over time, you'll see some technicians won't even bother turning the printer off. They'll literally just open the panel while the printer is still on. And in most cases, the printers will go and scream about it. They'll go and make some loud beeping sound of some kind, going beep, 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 to basically say, hey, there's a panel open. And that's probably not the way you're supposed to be doing it. But as time goes by, you are going to gain experience, and you're probably going to learn how to go and do that safely. I do not recommend you guys do that unless you know what you're doing. It's kind of like a mechanic on a car. In the beginning, you're probably going to keep all cars off You know, you're going to make sure the handbrake or the emergency brake is on and all that kind of stuff when working on the vehicle. But as time goes by, depending on the problem, you might not even turn the car off because you'll know how to safely solve the problem while the vehicle is still running. That's called experience. Same thing happens with printers, guys. As time goes by, you'll know when you can go and turn the printer on and when you can actually go and remove the paper or whatever the case might be while it is still on. That's experience. You'll normally be able to feel where it's hot and when it's not without actually physically touching. You can just hold your hands near and you'll feel it radiating. A rule of thumb is to try and avoid metal. You'll find the metal is normally the hot things. The plastic ones normally don't get it hot because if they did, they would obviously melt. So touch only the plastic, but before you even do that, hover your hand near it before you touch it, and you'll feel if it's radiating heat or not. You can actually feel it radiating the heat. Now moving on to paper not feeding or multi-page misfit. So this is when it's not picking up a page at all. Or if it does pick it up, it'll jam like multiple pages or just pick up like 2-3 pages in one go. This can be multiple things. It could be improper paper type. You're not using the right paper. It's too glossy or it's not glossy enough. The size is incorrect or you loaded it incorrectly. But most commonly I've seen this is because of rollers. Remember I said rollers become smooth over time. And that is the most common reason for the average paper jam. As they become smoother and smoother, they've got less and less grip, and eventually it's going to start slipping. It's not going to pick papers up, or if it'll pick it up, and at some point the paper's going to go in skew. Maybe there's a roller on the left, there's a roller on the right of the page, and as it basically pushes the paper through the printer to where it needs to go, the one roller does not have as much grip as the other roller, and it's going to go and skew the paper, and that's when jams tend to start happening. Then we've got grinding noises. It's not something I hear often, but if you do hear that, it can be a lot of things, but the most common reason for a grinding noise, guys, is to reseat your cartridges or the rollers. The rollers are not in properly, or the cartridges are not in properly. So just make extra tippy toes sure the cartridges are in properly and the rollers. It's more likely going to be the rollers because I've seen in most printers that the cartridges are not in properly. They would not be able to close. The place where they're supposed to go in, that place is not going to be able to close. And very often a printer that has a sensor or something is going to alert you that the cartridges are not in properly. It's going to tell you there's no cartridge detected or it's not seated properly. So it's probably more likely going to be the rollers here when you hear a grinding noise. Alright, let's move on to printer quality issues. So this is when it is printing, well, for the most part it's printing, but it's not printing the way it's supposed to. You or the user is complaining that it's not printing the way it's supposed to. Something is not quite right. Now I'm going to give you guys quite a few scenarios. They're quite a lot, probably about between, I don't know, 5 and 10 of them. And for every one of them, I'm going to give you a reason, the most likely reason to cause that issue. So the first one on my list here is faded print. So when you or the user are printing, and it is printing, but it's getting faded, that is most likely because the ink is done. So considering that most people are using laser printers these days, I would say go check the toner cartridge and consider replacing the toner cartridge. If it's an inkjet printer, the same applies, and you just need to go and check the cartridge. So it's usually because the ink is about to be finished. Then you get blank pages. It's printing, well at least it's pushing the paper through all the way through the printer, but the pages are blank. This can also be a result of the ink is done, but usually you can gradually see that's about to happen because it gets faded. Or it could be an application or a driver issue. Or you maybe recently replaced the cartridge, but you never removed that stripe, that seal on the cartridge. Remember that little strip you're supposed to pull off? Maybe you didn't remove it, which means the ink can't actually get out. So go and check if it did work perfectly fine and now suddenly it doesn't work after you replace the cartridge. Just go and check. Maybe this is a seal you forgot to remove. If you see white stripes on the page, so it prints, but it's got white stripes. This could be because of uneven toner distribution, or maybe you just need to go and replace the transfer rollers themselves. If you see black stripes, or a whole black page for that matter, this can be a faulty power supply, or the toner cartridge is once again faulty. If you see speckling on printed pages, so it prints, but there's like speckles, almost like it's dirty, it could just be time for you to go and clean the inside of that printer, because maybe it did print perfectly fine, but because there's ink all over in the inside of that printer, it's just getting onto place where it's not supposed to. So it might just be time to do a bit of housekeeping and just clean the freaking printer, for crying out loud. Now this list we've got in front of us, obviously I've ran out of room here. That's not the full list, so let me just start over and clean this page for you guys up. So there we go. It's blank. And I've got another couple of ones I want to mention for you guys. So the next one up is vertical or horizontal lines. Yes, lines on the pages. That could also be a matter of you need to clean or replace the feed roller. So there's some ink on there, the rollers are dirty, and this is now getting onto the pages because they're transferring the pages. So you might just need to replace the rollers or just clean the freaking rollers with isopropyl alcohol. And then you get toner not fused to the paper. So the toner is that powder kind of ink we use in laser printers, the most common kind of printer we get. So there's toner, but it's kind of still loose on the page. When you touch it, it kind of gets into your fingers, and it's not actually fused to the paper, properly. That could be time for you to go and replace the fuser unit. It's very, very rare that you need to go and do that, but let me tell you, that's very expensive to go and do. You better hope it's not that. At least if it's your printer, you better hope it's not that. When you get what they call double or echo images, in brackets, I went and added ghost image there. That's actually what we call it in real life. The course calls it double or echo images, but in real life we call these ghost images. Sometimes these are called shadow images, as well. So that's another name that they've got. So they've got double images, echo images, ghost images, shadow images. It's got so many names, but it always comes down to the same thing. When you or the user print something, you can kind of partially still see the previous image from the previous document, whatever that might be. So every time you print a page, you can partially still see whatever the previous document was on the new document. So that is when the printer is dirty. So it's also a sign of it's an issue of the imaging drum. It's not cleaning itself properly. So what's supposed to happen is every time you print a page, and this happens very quickly, guys, the drum or the rollers clean themselves, especially the drum. It cleans itself, and eventually over time it no longer does that. It doesn't do it properly, and that's a clear sign that you need to go and replace some parts, which is also very expensive. The very last printer quality issue I'm going to list for you guys here is color is missing. So it's printing, but it prints in no color, or one of the colors in general is missing. So that could be a missing cartridge, or the cartridge is just not registering. Yep. So maybe you just did not put in one of the color cartridges. You've got black, and one of those three colors we mentioned earlier, which is cane, which kind of looks blue, magenta, which looks pink, and then yellow, which is yellow. One of those color cartridges, you just don't have a cartridge in there, because the printer will actually work like that. Some printers will, some won't. So maybe you or someone took the cartridge out and just never put one in. So it's going to print, but it's not going to print the colors correctly, because it actually gets all the colors of the rainbow by mixing those three colors together, which is pretty cool in my opinion. Or you do have a cartridge in, but it's not plugged in correctly, or it's not registering correctly, which is also causing these issues. The printer thinks there's no cartridge. Meanwhile, it's in there, it's just not registered properly. Yeah, weird things happen, I know. Anyway, folks, that is finally the end of this module. That's the end of that third section. If you would like to revisit a specific topic, like I said in the beginning of this module, you can go into the video description. Majority of the topics have timestamps next to them. You can just go make use of that to go and revisit whatever it is you want to go and revisit. Guys, thank you for watching this module. That was the last module for Core 1. It's not the last module of the course. The course has got 20 modules. Core 1 consists of 9. Core 2 consists of 11 modules. So Core 2 will be from Module 10 all the way to Module 20, which is 11 modules. It's not more content, it's just stretched out over more modules for some reason. I don't know why CompTIA does that, but they did that. So if you guys have enjoyed this module, if you've learned something, like I said, please do me a favor and give the video a like, so that YouTube can go and promote it more to other people that actually need it, that cannot afford training. And if you'd like to know when I release the first module for Core 2, which will be very shortly, remember to subscribe. Special thank you to all of you that has been sponsoring me in this channel, the Patreon sponsors, PayPal sponsors, those of you that's been clicking on the thanks button below the video, and even those of you that's been buying me a milkshake or a coffee. So if you also want to sponsor me or the channel in some sort of way, you can find all of that in the video description down below, guys. Alright, see you in Module 10 on Core 2, boys and girls.